Well, I want to welcome everyone to the second 2017 AECT-OTP webinar. The title of this session is Diversity Training and Approaches to Organizational Change with Diverse Employees. We're very pleased and fortunate today to have Ashley MacArthur as our presenter. And just a few words about Ashley. She is the owner of MacArthur Human Performance Technologies, which is a human performance technology firm that works with agriculture, construction, and military clients in California. Ashley has been working performance improvement and project management since 2009. Her passion lies in assisting employees with reaching their full performance potential in the workplace. Ashley also focuses on migrant worker instruction in the areas of work, education, and legal topics, as she values incorporating effective technology into safety and diversity trainings. Ashley is also a first-year instructional technology doctoral student. So with that brief introduction, please join me in welcoming Ashley as our knowledgeable presenter for today. And Ashley, I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Boileau. And my name is Ashley MacArthur. So what I'd like to share with you all today is talking about, focuses actually on diversity. And though diversity has different definitions, I'll clarify for you the one with which I'll approach this training, as well as the newer, more expanded definition. So to get started, we'll talk again about what is diversity. We'll go into why it matters and how it impacts your organization. And then we'll bridge into how we train diverse employees. After that, I'm going to share with you some examples in action, just different things that I've done with the organizations with which I work. I'll follow that with what I call the diversity tree, which looks at building a diverse organization and successfully implementing trainings. We'll follow that with a conclusion as well as my contact information, and then some time for any questions that anyone may have. And I apologize in advance if my voice gets a bit raspy. I've been having a head cold this last week, so we're muscling through it though. So what is diversity? Essentially, diversity is any difference that exists within a person that can be classified. Examples include things like gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, culture, language, religion, socioeconomic status, and a multitude of other personal identifiers. The traditional definition of diversity, as I mentioned, we'd be talking about the difference between the two. The traditional one really focused on cultural differences and gender-based differences. So really things that were visible and surface level. But there was a shift in that definition between 2012 and 2016. Diversity was redefined and expanded to include nearly all personal identifiers. So this expanded definition encompasses virtually any attribute that people can ascribe to themselves. And this is sourced largely from work done by Dion and Molina Giron in 2016, really looking at university students' perceptions of diversity and ways in which they classify themselves, as well as how different organization employees classify themselves. So this expanded to include things such as political affiliations, various disorders, your Myers-Briggs personality type, and then Harry Potter houses, which I'll talk to you more about later. It was a really interesting one that we found. So under this new definition, basically all organizations are diverse organizations. But for the sake of today, we're going to focus mainly on the traditional definition, looking more at cultural and gender-based differences. So why does diversity matter? One of the key reasons is because diversity is on the rise in the United States. It's increasing at a more rapid rate than it has in history, and this is for two main reasons. One of the big reasons is because there's an increase in people entering this country and its workforce, both from different regions and geographic locations coming to the country, as well as global citizenship, which is where people are living remotely and working for organizations, sometimes in countries from which they're not from and in which they do not live. So that's that big expansion of the workforce as far as different locations. Additionally, more diverse people are entering the workforce. We're seeing an increase of people in different socioeconomic classes, different races, genders, and languages, as well as an increase in females in the workforce, which has largely been in an upswing since the 1970s. Lastly, there's a larger number of people who are self-identifying, which is our third contribution to this increase in rise in diversity in the United States. People are becoming more comfortable clarifying and specifying their gender, their race, their religion, their age, different preferences that they might have. Though that's not universally accepted, it is increasing, which is another reason why diversity is so important. Additionally, two other reasons as to why diversity matters for organizational perspectives is because sometimes diverse employees and their unique needs are ignored. We tend to use a lot of one-size-fits-all approaches with training. We go in, we deliver the training, we deliver some sort of assessment and survey, and we move on. And that's not always been effective for diverse organizations. For things such as language barriers, sometimes lack of understanding with different context and different language uses, as well as an ignorance of diversity attributes, which penetrates below what you see on the surface and can include things like eye contact, willingness to take credit for different accomplishments, which we really see in organization areas when we're looking at competency-based assessments. So acknowledging these diverse employees and meeting their unique needs and their differences is one of the major reasons that diversity is so important for organizations. And then additionally, this lack of diversity understanding can lead to failed interventions in our workforces. Again, kind of using that one-size-fits-all approach, or just assuming that our employees are getting what we expect them to get and not following through with a full evaluation. We really need to make sure that we understand that diversity, and that's a huge reason that organizations can be successful and prohibit failed interventions with diverse employees. So how does diversity impact organizations? What I'd like to do here is just talk about some of the trends that we've been working through in the organizational field. So past trends include things like equal employment opportunity, as well as diversity hirings, and as I mentioned, that culturally based definition and culturally based differences, as well as hiring those different cultures. So we focused more in the past on compliance, having a certain number of people who meet different racial and gender requirements in the workforce. Currently, we're still seeing that swing of equal employment opportunity, but it's expanded. So we're moving beyond things like race and ethnicity. We're now starting to include things like age differences, education differences, language, geographic location, and a multitude of other things. So that EEO is still there, but it is expanded. Beyond that, we're looking also at both mandatory and optional diversity trainings that organizations are implementing. And this last one is my favorite, diversity education at the college level. So we're seeing an upswing in different diversity courses at universities, and specifically at the University of West Florida, they have a program that looks at directing diversity education. So it's really interesting to see those changes and to see that value of diversity. Its impacts are penetrating beyond the organization and into our education. So we're trying to get our students prepared for those diverse organizations before they even enter them. And then diversity impacts the organization's culture, which may seem fairly obvious, but it's actually a really deep thought. It can be both positive and negative, and it trickles down and affects all stakeholders. So if you have this positive diversity culture in your organization, that's going to trickle through your owners, through your managers, through your employees, and down into their families. And the same can be said of negative. So those impacts are really far-reaching and important for us to consider. So how do we train diverse organizations? I need probably hours in order to go through all of the details, but for the sake of the webinar, I've narrowed this down to a few key points. The top one is to create an understanding of diversity and diverse people. Specifically, what I mean by that is to create this atmosphere of acceptance and civility. So what we've done traditionally is tolerate one another. You put your head down, grit your teeth, and bear different people because you think you have to just put up with it in the workplace. On the other extreme, you have validation, where you're sacrificing your own morals and values and beliefs to validate somebody else and telling them, oh, yes, I agree with what you're saying, or I agree with who you are, or the things that you do. So between those two extremes, we have acceptance and civility, where we reach this point of simply taking people for who they are, rather than passing any sort of judgment one way or the other, and really working to understand them as a person and understand the unique things that they can bring to the organization. Additionally, human resource interventions, particularly staffing, is another way that we can work to train our diverse organizations and our diverse employees. So this really comes down to, putting the right people in the right places. I am not a good person to deliver trainings in Chinese because I do not speak Chinese. If there is an employee who does, that is a good person to put in that position. You can train them up on how to deliver presentations. If they have training already, refine it to shape the organization's culture, but really being aware of who you have and what their capabilities are, and putting them in the best places to help not only the organization, but to help that employee grow as well. Next is intercultural competency development and diversity training. This has been happening. It's time tested. It's been updated over time with different diversity topics, and it's something that we've seen to be effective, not in all cases, but in several. And really the key difference comes down to being able to evaluate whether or not that training was successful and figuring what your employees took away from that training. It is very valuable, that competency development, but it's something that we need to rely on, I would say, a little bit more than once a year or twice a year. What we do with one of the clients with which I work is we work with a special workman's comp company that has Latin American diversity competency training. And every quarter we attend that training. There's always something new. Of course, some of it is repeated, but you're always expanding. And you hit things that next time that you missed that first time. And so really the value of those is not lost. That's been around for a while. I don't really think we'll see it go anywhere. But using that to train your employees is effective. It helps broaden their minds to understand what people's differences are and help them embrace them a bit more. For particularly resistant employees, that's where coaching and mentoring comes in, where people need perhaps a bit more attention to work on that acceptance of other people. Coaching and mentoring are absolutely not lost on employees like that. Putting them with someone who can understand the issues that that employee has with the acceptance of others and helping to overcome those issues is something that both the research and my practice has shown to be effective and beneficial for training diverse organizations. Motivators. I love a good motivator. Intrinsic, of course, is my favorite, but extrinsic is good as well. So generating that buy-in with employees to work together, to cooperate together, to understand one another, and to bring in that atmosphere of acceptance is going to really provide a solid backbone for that organizational development and training. Migration management and retention of quality employees is huge with diversity training, especially when you're looking at people who are diverse themselves, who could provide an example for newer diverse employees to keep them around and to help them develop. And this creates this triple win. You're having value for your employers, your employees, and your customers or clients. And then lastly, the biggest piece of this is communication. This open and appropriate communication. And what I found as well as in my practice and the research is that open and continuous communication between your employees themselves and between your employees and the managers and the employees in human resources is crucial. That's a huge part of how you know whether or not that training is effective and how you can figure out what the unique needs of these employees are. And I'll get into some examples in that in my next page talking about case studies. So Gary and Julie Dreiberg Farms. This is an agriculture organization in Northern California, and I'm actually here this week delivering some different trainings. So it's kind of a neat place to be considering this webinar. But we look a lot at safety training and safety interventions here, as well as some staffing interventions. So I'd like to talk with you about those and the different things that we've done when working with these diverse employees. So just a little bit of background on the organization. There are over 35 employees. Of those 35 employees, we have 3 women, all the rest are men, 5 Caucasian employees, and everybody else is Latin American or Hispanic. The education levels vary, reading levels vary, English proficiency varies, and so it's a really interesting mix of people all working together. The safety trainings are the first thing that I really would like to talk about. When I was first hired to come in and help this organization with their safety trainings, it was a really large mismatch. They were doing the trainings and so they were meeting that compliance, but the employees weren't gaining from it. They weren't retaining that. And one of the key reasons I was brought in was because of the accidents that were happening with that lack of training. So there was a non-native Spanish speaker delivering the trainings only in English and reading from a paper. Obviously, the employees that didn't speak English were not understanding anything that the trainer was saying. And so we expanded from there. We started creating PowerPoints that were bilingual, so both groups of employees, English and Spanish speaking, could understand the training materials, which was a big step forward in this. Since then, we've expanded to include a bilingual presenter, as well as more specific evaluations rather than, did you enjoy the survey or did you enjoy the training today, in the form of a survey, but looking also more at what specifically did you learn? Did you learn anything at all? Where can we improve? Is there a topic that we missed that you think we should expand upon? So really for those particular interventions, staffing was huge. We put a right person in the right spot for that person and for the business. Our materials were huge. We expanded that communication and provided the employees with materials that they could understand, which were presented both in written and verbal communication forms. Beyond that, we expanded the surveys. We looked to foster that open communication with the employees to gauge whether or not they were actually gaining anything from the trainings. And so we took that compliance and expanded it to more of a needs meeting program, which the clients and I are very proud of today. The second intervention that I would like to talk to you about is the staffing intervention that we implemented. One of the departments from this company was having some personnel issues. The manager was a college-educated white male who we worked with in coaching and worked with in mentoring, and really didn't see any changes in his behavior as far as accepting those who were diverse. This employee would get frustrated because people didn't speak English. He would get frustrated because employees would have concerns, but they were uncomfortable expressing them. And so after doing some staffing and moving him around to different places, ultimately it was a removal of that employee from the company. So the point to that is really putting the right people in the right place. That is part of it, but also looking at the culture that you have in your organization and creating that culture of acceptance and civility and that understanding of diversity in order to train these diverse employees so that everyone feels comfortable expressing concerns and working with each other and interacting with one another. And, we did what we could with this particular employee, but at the end of the day, it was better for the organization to remove him. And so sometimes you have to make those tough choices when working with diverse organizations. If you have a diverse organization and you have a manager who doesn't value diversity, then the organizational culture is not a match for that employee. So on to something more positive. Some of the activities that we've done to build the cultural understanding and diversity understanding here at the company were personality tests. So we have 3 main departments, and each of those 3 managers took the Myers-Briggs personality test, which was really interesting, I think, for them and for the company because they could reflect on their management styles. They could see benefits of their personality as well as potential flaws of their personality and their leadership styles, and we gave them tools to work on those potential flaws. So if somebody is a little bit more introverted in a management position, giving them tools to make themselves more accessible for employees to express their concerns and to express different things that were happening with them that needed to be communicated. And that really comes back to that employee retention and keeping people who are high quality and making them feel comfortable, creating that triple win, that value for them, making them feel like they have a place in the organization and really working to meet their needs. And if you have managers who know their potential leadership flaws with something as simple as a Myers-Briggs personality test, it's a really an effective way to help open their understanding and create that diversity acceptance. Additionally, team building, and this is where the Harry Potter test that I was talking about earlier comes into play. So this last December, at the end of the year, it's more focused on groundwork for Gary and Julie Driver Farms. They don't have anything they're harvesting, they're not really planting, and so there tends to be a little bit more downtime and shop work. And so what we did one day was sit everybody down and have everybody take the Harry Potter test. So it's kind of an interesting time of year because we have full-time employees plus harvest employees still around. And so it's people who've been with the organization for an extended period of time, coupled with people who are relatively new. And so taking these tests and figuring out which Harry Potter house they belong to may sound kind of a ridiculous thing. But when everybody was broken up into their houses, the interaction was higher than I've ever seen among these employees because they found a new thing to bond with each other outside of culture, outside of language, outside of education, outside of employment type. And it was a really neat thing to see. And so you had people who didn't think that they had anything in common at all, find out that they were in the same Harry Potter house and build relationships that are still there today and that I think will continue to be there because they found that commonality, which is a huge, huge thing, I think, with diversity organizations is showing people that, yes, everybody is different, but you might have something obscure like a Harry Potter house in common with people that you didn't know that you had. I'm not sure how we are on time, but there's a video that I wanted to show which really looks at this diversity barrier breaking. So I'm going to quickly play it. I'm not sure if you guys can hear the volume. If somebody could tell me whether or not you can hear it, I would really appreciate it.
The TV commercial titled "All That We Share" challenges our thoughts on the things that.
Yes, we can see and hear it.
Going
Thank
on
you.
in today's world between Trump and Trump. This video just gives me a lot of feels. Like you just realize, well, we all might seem different. We're all really just the same. In the video, Dean step into boxes which denote categories: the high earners, those getting by, those we avoid versus those we trust. Then they're asked some honest questions about who they are, and that's when everyone starts stepping outside the box. We've got the class clowns.
Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn?
We've got people who've seen UFOs, people who have been bullied, those who have step parents, people who believe in life after death, which invariably blends the crowd and draws on their similarities and sends a powerful message about our differences. But then, of course, YouTube commenters have to go and ruin the good vibe.
Okay, we're going to end it there. So basically, this video, coupled with what I've been saying about the Harry Potter house, really looks at different ways that you can bring about diversity training and as well as that diversity understanding to your employees. So we're looking at, sorry, just one moment while this reloads. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so we're looking at different ways to break down those barriers, which is something that I consider to be the most valuable takeaway that I've had when working with diverse organizations is really being able to look at these diversity barriers, these differences that people may see, whether culturally or gender-based, socioeconomic status, political affiliation, all these different things, and to kind of strip that all away and give each other something else to quantify themselves as, like a Harry Potter house or a class clown or people who've seen UFOs or a wide variety of other things. And so that's been a huge way that I've found to destroy those diversity barriers and to really bring about that diversity culture and that diversity understanding and create this atmosphere of people who are willing to cooperate with each other and to not only accept training from one another throughout their work, but to also accept training from the managers if they were to take part in this as well, to build that solid base of acceptance with each other. So my diversity tree, which I mentioned to you all earlier, this is just something that I have found to be effective. This is what I show my clients when I'm talking with them about building this diversity culture and this diversity understanding in order to train diverse employees. The bottom thing, the foundation of all of it, is this desire to grow, this motivation, which is the backbone, I think, of a lot of interventions, is that grow desire. But in diverse organizations, really illustrating that desire and instilling it within all of your employees and doing so uniquely to meet their different needs and to meet their different desires, followed by a good environment, that diversity understanding, as I noted, that acceptance and civility rather than tolerance and validation, as well as open communications, which I cannot say enough how valuable those open communications are. They're gauging what training needs to happen. They're also gauging whether or not that training was effective. So if you take away nothing else from this webinar, please take away that open communication aspect. Necessary nutrients is my next level. So intercultural competence training, diversity training, those are things that are providing your employees with the nutrients necessary to grow into this diverse organization built on understanding. Trellising looks more at coaching and mentoring, so helping structure people along these paths of diversity acceptance. This organic shape, migration management. So you'll have different people in different positions, and some of them may be diverse, some of them may have been there for extended periods of time, some of them may be new, some of them may be there temporary periods of time. It doesn't matter. When you have that good employee, you retain them. Even if they're temporary, they come back every year. That migration management, especially in Latin American employees, if they return to Mexico and then come back in the spring, migration management for them is providing a place for them to return to and encouraging them to come back. So that's really another big part of this for my agribusiness organizations. And then lastly, directional pruning, which relates back to my staffing example and the employee that was, or the manager that was let go. Sometimes you have to make those hard choices. And when you're working in a diverse organization, you're wanting to train diverse employees and build that acceptance and civility. Sometimes certain people don't fit with that kind of organizational culture, and you have to be able to make those tough decisions, even if you do not necessarily want to, for the sake of your organization and its employees. So in conclusion, so we went over the definition of diversity, and it is shifted, it is changed, it is expanded to include so much more than culture and the color of our skin and our gender and what you see on the surface. It's penetrated who we are. And this expansion has also helped us to give a breakdown of different diversity barriers to find different factors that people have in common and unite them in ways that we haven't seen in the past. Workplace diversity is rapidly increasing. As I noted, of course, that's from different geographic locations. That's from different people in the country already entering the workforce. And that's from the increase in personal identification. Also, diverse organizations are successfully implementing interventions with diversity understanding, which is the big thing that I've been talking about with acceptance and civility and communication. I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talk about that by now, but those are the three things that I have found to be the absolute most effective when training diverse employees: that acceptance of their differences, that civility when interacting with each other, and that communication to find out what they really need and the best way in which for me to provide it, as well as whether or not what I provided was effective. So tested and researched approaches. Of course, diversity understanding can be accomplished with the different things that I've mentioned throughout this presentation. HR interventions, coaching, intercultural competence training, different motivators, migration management, and then, of course, increased communications, as well as this foundation of acceptance and civility, which transitions into this atmosphere of harmony, this harnessing and valuing of diversity, putting the right people in the right places for the organization and for the employee themselves. And then I share with you my diversity tree. Again, that's what I share with my clients when I'm talking about building these diversity understanding cultures as a way in which to create a solid ground from which to train employees. Organizations are organic. They're not in a box. They're occurring, especially diverse organizations, are occurring in a more natural pattern where you're getting people from literally all over the globe working together in the same environment. And that's a really interesting thing to see. But models and practices must be adapted for those specific organizations. Ultimately, do not expect everything to fit into a single box or a single approach when you're working with diverse employees, because all of their needs are unique. And then lastly, diverse organizations require an understanding of diversity, which is my big drive home for this. Again, acceptance, civility, communications. That's what's going to foster that diversity understanding. That's what's going to allow you as a HPT practitioner to see what is needed, the best way to provide it, and whether or not it was effective. And if you trickle that down through your organization and build an organizational culture on that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that's going to go down through the owners, through the managers, through the employees, and down to their families. So that's all I have for you guys other than my contact information. If you'd like to take a minute to write it down, but we will share these slides afterward. And then just some time for questions if you guys have any questions.
Ashley, thank you so much. I mean, that was, you gave us a lot to think about.
It is a lot. I'm sorry, it's a lot. It can be overwhelming.
Well, we have a fairly small group, so I would, and your microphones are muted when you join. Feel free to unmute, to jump in. I think that we can have a bit of a conversation. I noted a couple questions that came in. Typically, participants will type questions into the chat window, and just a couple of things to get us going with this. And again, I encourage anyone to chime in. But you raised a number of good points in your presentation, Ashley. You know, and it's interesting, all of us, you know, have different experiences. In the recent election cycle, we've seen a broad range of diverse groups and issues in the media and in the forefront that is affecting what we do. We're seeing examples in business now with the Asian American doctor who was forcibly removed from a United flight. You know, so diversity is very much in the forefront in terms of perception and clearly in the business realm. So my question to you is that we can look at diversity as a moral imperative that says that it's no longer, as you point out, it's no longer based on just race or gender. It's really a spectrum. It's sexuality, it's sexual preference, it's education, it's culture, it's all of these things, and each one of us is truly unique. There are compliance issues and laws that have to be enforced. And that's really where the sort of the diversity has come from. We've all had diversity training from HR, which is kind of like watching a PowerPoint that says this sexual harassment is unwelcome touching or advances, and watch these slides and click the box that says you watch the slides and now you're certified. So we can check that off, and now we have a tolerant environment. We know that doesn't work necessarily. But my question to you is, beyond the compliance issues, is there a business imperative or a business interest? In other words, are companies that embrace diversity and implement the types of programs that you suggest, is there evidence to suggest that they're more profitable, that they're more successful in terms of attracting new customers? Does it affect the bottom line?
From what I've seen in the clients with which I work, yes, absolutely. For basically employee productivity is the number one thing. So going back to Gary and Julie Dreiberg Farms, looking at the difference of the culture that we had when the manager was around, who was resistant, I guess is the best way to say it, to cultures that were different from his. The productivity was very low. It was taking extended periods of time to finish tasks, to work on equipment. Things were getting missed. It was a huge waste of resources because he wasn't communicating with employees what needed to be done. For one example, they ended up applying a chemical to walnuts that was not supposed to be applied because, one, it wasn't for the walnuts, it was for another crop entirely, and two, it was a no spray day. And those were things that the manager said he communicated, but the employee didn't understand him. And that's a lot of he said, she said in that situation, so I won't go into any more detail on that. But that understanding alleviated all of those problems. We removed that lack of communication. We removed that waste of resources. We were able to more efficiently and productively work together and have employees work together in an environment where they were bitter to be there. They weren't unhappy to be there. They weren't sluggish or slow. Some of them weren't showing up for work because of this manager, but when that person was removed and this culture was implemented, it was a complete turnaround. So for that alone, I would say absolutely. As far as clients go, it's also been able to help this company expand into working with different people. So they took on vine seed for the first time ever, which is melon crops and things like that. And that's something that they hadn't done before. And a large reason was because the family that does it is Asian American. And so that manager that was there was not willing to work with them for reasons that he did not say were racially based, but given his interaction with other employees, it wouldn't be a stretch to figure that. But the clients have expanded. My clients have expanded into that field now and are working with these clients as well. So I would say absolutely it opens up a lot of more productivity, absolutely, as well as more relations, so gaining more clients and different clients. And then if you're leading with that example, you're setting that positive atmosphere for your employees who want to come to work, who, if we're looking to hire more people seasonally, hear positive reputations about the company, and you end up attracting, I think, a higher quality of employee from what I've seen.
Okay. It's interesting, and I want to share a personal experience, and then kind of a quick follow up. Over the weekend, I rented and watched Hidden Figures. It's the movie that deals with the African American female geniuses that were the backbone of the early NASA program in the 1960s, and some of the issues that they ran into. So my recommendation, my Netflix recommendation or Amazon, is to definitely watch that one. It's worth seeing. The question is, and it sort of ties into that, what you've just been talking about, is how do we effectively model diversity? You've talked about some things in your examples, particularly the Myers-Briggs, the Harry Potter house experiences, and those types of things. Are there other low-hanging fruit, I guess, things that we can model on a daily basis? And I'm thinking about, in companies that have Muslim populations, offering prayer rooms, or companies that have single mothers or new mothers. Are there nursing rooms that you can go into, or is there available on-site daycare? So are there, in your experience and in your work with your clients, is there things that you can do to effectively model diversity, bilingual communications, posters? I mean, how do you embrace that and kind of, make it an inclusive environment?
Absolutely. Bilingual posters are huge. That's something that was kind of in existence before, but not all of the posters were there. The legally ones, it was very much a compliance situation. The ones that had to be there were there. But what we've done with all of our trainings since July of 2015, we've expanded everything as bilingual. Every poster that we put up, even birth announcements. So if an employee has a kid, that's something new that we've started to do also. That goes up in the break room on the fridge. That's bilingual. Everything has become bilingual to meet those needs, which I think does some of it. And for the situations like you described, I feel absolutely that, prayer rooms would be beneficial. Nursing rooms for new moms would be beneficial. Daycare would be beneficial. The clients with which I work don't have anyone who falls under those categories, but the language area is very key. And then just basic community development, I guess, would be the best way to say it. So when the guys take their lunch breaks, what's happening before is people would go sit in their vehicles and eat their lunch. And so now there's the break room. And so that's where we hold our safety meetings and our trainings and all of that. And so they sit in there and they have lunch in there together. And once a week, there'll be some sort of dessert, whether it's cupcakes or brownies or something like that, to try and bring everybody in there and have them sit together so that they're eating meals together, which is kind of an interesting thing, but it's shown when you're doing that, you're eating with each other. That's that community development. People are sharing their food and their lunches, and One of the employees was just talking to me the other day about how he would never bring his lunch until they started doing that. He would bring food so that he could trade food with the other guys because some of their wives were better cooks. So it's a community development thing that I've seen to be helpful in that way. But I definitely think that consideration of the differences needs to be met. Or if there's somebody who's uncomfortable with the situation, I would hope that they're comfortable enough to share, hey, this isn't really working for me. What if you did this instead? And the clients with whom I work really reward that kind of communication, that, this isn't working. What if we tried this instead? And I think if that is integrated into more diverse organizations, we would see more positive employee interactions and more feelings of inclusion, because their voices are being heard and their needs are being met, and different things that they desire can be integrated. Things that may not necessarily need to happen, like the cupcakes, but if somebody wants them there, they feel like they're being heard, they feel like they're being included and valued.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Thank you.
I'm pausing just to see if anyone else jumps in. I do have a couple more. I mean, there's just so much, again, content that you covered for us.
It is a lot. I took some of it out too, actually.
Well, that's okay. It's all valuable. Believe me. When you talk about your trainings, and you sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of your assessments. We think for trainings, we think of course, Kirkpatrick, 4 levels of assessment. Reaction, knowledge, retention, transfer is usually about as far as we get, particularly from a consultant. But if you're in some of the long-term engagements that you have with some of your clients that you spoke of, you sort of intimated that you're approaching sort of that holy grail, that level 4 of impact in your trainings. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of either anecdotal evidence or how that's assessed or what sorts of evaluations you've come across for that?
Yeah, it's well, for the clients I have, it's pretty nice in the way of evidence, because people are either following the safety procedures that they're supposed to follow or they're not. So that's really really nice for me, or they're following policy or they're not following policy. And we've been able to see that they are following policy and they are following the procedures, and people aren't getting hurt as often, and employee conflict has decreased significantly, as far as people are more comfortable telling each other, I guess this is the best way to say it, hey, you're not wearing the proper personal protective equipment, rather than kind of sneaking around and nobody saying anything at all, and then somebody ends up getting fined from the state, and then the company gets fined from the state. And it's really black and white, really evident. It's either happening or it's not happening. So that's really helpful for me in those areas. But I guess more in the military world, I could talk about that a little bit more. The impact, I would say there, that you could see really focused on the overall attitudes that the managers had with each other. And just to use one example, there was a captain in charge of the Department of Safety and Standardization, and he was having a really difficult time with people not doing the things that they were supposed to be doing. Some guys just not showing up at all. And we were able to kind of delve into it, figure out what was going on, help the situation. And then again, people were being productive, but it was also this more positive workplace. So guys weren't coming in to do their jobs because they had felt so negatively about everything that was happening. And the fact that they were coming and were feeling more positively about everything was a big impact factor, I would say. And it completely changed the dynamic of the shop. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And as you were speaking, I've got some great dialogue I'm seeing going on in the chat area right now. And Kate Leonard, and I really appreciate this comment, and Lawyer sort of chimed in on this as well. But Kate in the chat window says that she's moved from Canada 15 years ago and was surprised to see at how the topic of diversity is approached here. It's not the same in every country. And Kate, I would ask you to to trying to tell us what you mean. Is it
Sure,
like, are you saying that in Canada, it's not a big deal? You just have diversity, and why do we have to call it out in the open? Or, I mean,
that's a good start for sure. But I realized when I moved to the U.S. that diversity was primarily about race. And it took me aback a little bit because in Canada, I felt we were much more multicultural in our approach to diversity. And we might look at that topic in the way of physical ability and geographical origin. But race was rarely, or certainly wasn't the forefront, whereas when I moved to the US, it was only about race. And as you mentioned, Ashley, gender was certainly, certainly is right up there. So it was just, that we sometimes think we're talking about a broad topic, but it depends on the perspective. If you're in another country, it might be more of a regional. Sometimes I think we're diverse in so many ways. The men in my family are all over 6'6", so tall people, short people, we're very diverse. Yeah, I also brought up the fact that I think you've given me some material for a course that I'm teaching, because often, like you say, we check the box and we say, oh, well, we're going to have the diversity talk, and we have the professional come in to talk about it because we're so afraid to engage in the topic. But a lot of the things you've mentioned here on various ways we're diverse now, age, with the food we eat, political affiliation, global citizenship, all these are very good things that helps alleviate that tension if we just talk openly a little bit more, I hope.
Yeah,
thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree, Kate. It's a fascinating conversation to get into, and I've seen it good and bad. I mean, again, I'm not to go too much into personal anecdotes, but I used to spend 3 months a year in Belgium, working with Ford Motor Company at the time, and it was quite interesting. In Europe, in my experience, it's kind of like driving from here to Alabama, which is 20 minutes, except when you cross the border, the houses look the same, people look the same, but there's a different language, a different culture, and at that time, a different currency. And it was very. I remember going to a birthday party at a colleague's house. And in this country of Belgium, half the country is actually French and the other half is Flemish or Dutch. And college-educated people, my colleagues there, were typically fluent in Flemish, French, German, and English. And in that particular part of the country, Flemish was the native tongue. So I'm at this birthday party, and they're all white people. They all look like me, and we're all about the same age. So physically and visually, there's not really any difference. So diversity, we were just a bunch of white people hanging out. But all the conversations were in Dutch. So I'm sitting there and I'm feeling really weird and really as an outsider, because there's all this laughing and joking and conversation going. And it's not that my hosts were rude to me at all. As soon as I'd make eye contact, they would immediately revert to English. It's kind of like in Quebec, where people will speak French in the hotels and the cafes, but if you start engaging them in English, they'll immediately revert over. But I felt like I was only getting part of the conversation, and the takeaway for that is that so much of culture is embedded in language, and just something as simple as bilingual or multilingual can make a lot of difference. And I think that we're slowly coming around to that. And what I used to tell people is that I was the quintessential ugly American. I speak only English, and if I travel anywhere in the world, I expect people to speak English because, well, that's English, and that's what we talk. So it is a very broad and diverse topic.
Tim, don't you find that in our world right now, I find that it's the technology that splits people in my life. People that align with my thinking about technology and how I use it as a solution for so many things, and other people who would never think of using technology in ways that I might. And you find that that divide is very big sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. And even though, and this is, and now we're getting into a future webinar topic, which is digital literacy. What is it? We all use the same technology, but we all use it differently somehow. So what does that mean in terms of the digital divide and so forth? Ashley, I have one final question from me anyway, and then I promise I'll shut up and we'll spend the remaining time with any additional comments that you might have or our members. But you talked about staffing changes as a diversity intervention where you have situations, and the employee particularly who had some views that were not consistent with where the organization was trying to get to. So, and you talk about open communication as a cultural enrichment tool to address some of those, as well as staffing changes. Is there ever a situation where, as part of a diversity or culture enrichment program, that I'm imposing, or there's an imposition of values? It's saying, well, if you work here, you must be this, and maybe I'm not, I'm not interested in Asian culture, or I'm not interested in Franco cooking or Middle Eastern culture at all. Should I be forced to embrace these or to learn about them if it's just something I'm not interested in? In other words, at what point are you trying to impose a different set of values on me as a condition for my employment, or are we just expected to accommodate?
I think it plays into the culture of the organization, or at least for the clients here, it does. And my own personal values, which I have to acknowledge because that definitely affects what I do and the way in which I do things. I view everybody as equally. My family is triracial. We have all sorts of stuff going on. There are people that live in multiple countries. I have family still in Mexico. I have family in Germany. I have family all over the world. And it's, I was raised in a really unique environment where you respected people for their differences and you accept them and you wanted to understand them. I was raised to want to understand and to learn as much as possible about it. And so I think for me personally, that does absolutely affect the way in which I do things. But at the same time, the clients with which I work are largely not diverse in that way. It's a lot of Caucasian American families. And I think what it kind of comes down to for them is whether or not the employee meets that cultural diversity and that diversity and understanding environment that's been created. And there's that difference, that acceptance and civility, that middle ground between tolerating somebody else and then sacrificing your own views to validate somebody else's existence. And, with validation, which is where we were just trying to get the particular employee to the acceptance level, but he saw acceptance itself as validation, where if he would simply take that employee for who they were, for him, that was a sacrifice of what he considered to be a personal value. And so not being willing to sacrifice different ideas that he had, particularly about people's education levels, which I think really was a really major factor.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't even necessarily an ethnic rationale, but for him it was diversity. So, well, they're uneducated. They don't know. They have no idea. Well, it's not the case when you're working with mechanics who have been working in this trade for 2 decades. They may not have a college degree, but that doesn't mean that they're in a different spot. And so I think it's hard. It's a really fine area, a fine line between validation and acceptance, between getting somebody to a spot where they feel comfortable accepting people for who they are without sacrificing the things that they value and the things that they consider. What we were trying to do with this employee was to get him to accept the fact that, a college degree wasn't necessary to be intelligent, and it wasn't necessary to hold certain positions or to get certain amounts of pay. And he just didn't fit with that organization culture. And so I think that largely for all of my clients is that diversity culture that they have, that diversity understanding culture, and whether or not somebody fits with that culture. And that employee was a spouse of a female employee who was working in the office, and it was kind of one of those, oh, you should hire him. He's wonderful. He just finished his school. And so a lot of things, and it's hard. I don't blame the employee. I don't blame him for the way in which he is and the way that the things that he considers valuable. They just didn't fit with that culture, that company culture, which can be hard. But I think that goes back to the initial to answer your question more succinctly, that goes back to the initial staffing and that hiring process, the interview process, and to figure if somebody fits with the culture before you offer them the position, which is what should have happened and has happened since. So,
Excellent.
Experience.
Excellent. We have just a couple moments remaining, and I will open it up. I'm looking at the chat. Does anyone have any further questions for Ashley at this point? I'm not seeing any. Ashley, I would like to thank you again for your time and for sharing your perspectives and your experience. This is a fascinating topic that I think it comes in. Lori typed in the notes, yes, the slides will be available, as well as a video recording of this webinar, and you'll be able to access that through the Facebook group page for OTP. And also keep your eyes open. There will be an announcement for our next webinar, which will be in late May. I don't have my calendar open in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly when that is, but I think it's about the 22nd or so. But with that, again, thank you, Ashley, for your time today and for all of those in attendance. And I wish you all a wonderful day and a very diverse outlook in terms of your employment and your interactions with others. Good day, all.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.